All right. Thank you very much, Sandy. Good evening to everybody, and I'd like to thank Sandy and Jennifer for inviting us into their Arizona Water Scarce and Precious series. Kristen Wolf, and kind of new to Arizona, moved here about 6 years ago, but I was involved in water issues back here in Connecticut. Been a member of the Sierra Club since the 1980s. And when I came out to Arizona, joined a local chapter in the Cave Creek area, got introduced to Sandy, and she got me interested in this sustainable water network. So that's my connection to this group. So tonight we're going to talk about water for nature, water for rivers. And last month, Gary Beverly gave a presentation on rivers in peril, and he went into a lot of detail about what's going on with our rivers, and we're going to be kind of building on that tonight. So the Sustainable Water Network is a coalition, a loose coalition of about 30 environmental, community, conservation groups, and individuals that came together about 5 years ago, back in 2016, to work on more sustainable water laws and for better protection for our rivers. So a conservation vision was initiated by Sandy and the Sierra Club, and later joined by others. And the Sustainable Water Network, formerly the Sustainable Water Work Group, was created to propose policies to help prevent further degradation of our rivers, to find ways to balance water interests, to advocate for the integration and management of ground and surface water together, ensure environmental flows, or at least make them not worse than they are, and to include a broad range of stakeholders. So on our website, azwaterfuture.org, we have a little bit more information about the conservation vision. I'm not going to go through all the details. It goes through the vision for water sustainability. It lists some of the challenges rivers are facing in terms of groundwater pumping, reduced flows, a little bit about adjudication issues and how they're affecting rivers, the need for a clearer vision, the need to modernize Arizona water law, and that's what this group was created for. So since I'm on the website, I'm just going to jump to the home page for a moment and show you just a little bit more. There's more information about us on the home page. There's some information about different op-eds that we've done, some of the various ads that we've taken out in the Arizona Capital Times in their water focus group. An award from the Arizona Capital Times in the environment category. And then I'll get into this in just a little bit more detail in a moment, but some pictures from our people's public hearings that we held in various parts of the state. So again, that's on our website, azwaterfuture.org. All right, now. So this is just a list of some of the organizations that signed on to the vision. There's environmental groups, there's community groups, there's some business groups, and some faith groups. So a few years ago, we decided it was easier and more productive to have a steering committee work on policy changes and op-eds and be the area, the person who could send information out to the larger coalition, as well as be a place to receive guidance and suggestions from the larger coalition. So we have representatives from all over the state and out of the country in Costa Rica. Gary's up in Prescott, Trisha's in Sierra Vista, Carrie and Nancy are in Yuma, Madeline's in Costa Rica, She's from the Tucson area, and she's working on river issues in Costa Rica with rivers drying up due to the Del Monte pineapple production. And then Sandy, Jennifer, Linda, and I are in the Phoenix area. So again, last month in Gary's presentation, Rivers in Peril, he went into more detail about what's going on with our rivers. So kind of in a nutshell, we have over-allocation of surface waters, we have groundwater pumping, climate change, and aridification. And aridification means that climate change is not only making it hotter, but it's making it drier. So we like to use this map from the Nature Conservancy to show just how many miles of rivers we've lost. And you can see these tan lines represent the areas of rivers that are no longer perennial. They're dry most of the time unless it rains. You can see down here in the San Pedro, a lot's been lost. And in the Santa Cruz, a lot has been lost. And these darker colors represent water that's there mostly through effluent. So rivers are getting more attention in various papers lately, and that's a good thing. And Ian James from the Arizona Republic and Tony Davis from the Daily Star, as well as other reporters in other papers, have been reporting on river issues. We've been working with some of these reporters, and in these recent articles, you can see steering committee members and other coalition members and the work that they've been doing with rivers mentioned in a lot of these articles. And hopefully some legislators are taking notice of the concern that many people are having about our rivers now. And you have to wonder, how do these articles resonate with Arizonans? And what does this look like to others outside of our state? So there are many organizations trying to protect various rivers. And to implement the conservation vision, the Sustainable Water Network has focused on education and outreach to better inform the public of what's going on with our rivers and hopefully inspire them to become more involved in getting these changes implemented, and to try to change the law to allow more water to remain in our rivers. So as part of our education and outreach, when the legislative committees would not give a hearing to our proposed bill, we held our own people's public hearings in various parts of the state. And we had local experts and tribal leaders come and discuss river issues and the proposed bill. We've done many op-eds in multiple papers. We've done a lot of advertisements, mostly in the Arizona Capital Times, because that seems to catch the eye of the legislators. We've done lots of presentations to various community groups, to legislators. Senator Rotundo had a Waterwise group that several steering committee members presented to. The Water Resources Research Center does a series of what they call brown bag lunches. Multiple steering members have presented at those lunches. And we were involved in their 2020 conference, Water at the Crossroads, where we discussed water for nature and its exclusion from Arizona laws. There have been lots of meetings with state legislators and with representatives from federal level. We've had meetings with the Department of Water Resources and other environmental organizations. So currently we're focusing on the upcoming river series. And we've asked local experts and community members to tell their stories about their relationships with their local rivers and what's happening to those rivers. And coming up next month, we have Peter Else from the Lower San Pedro Watershed Alliance to talk about the Lower San Pedro River. And in December, Mike Foster from Friends of the San Pedro River to discuss the Upper San Pedro. And in January, we have Gina Leverett Mason from the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community to discuss the Salt River. February, it's Edith Thomas and former Lieutenant Governor Stone from the Gila River Indian Community for the Gila River. March, Gary Beverly from the Citizens Water Advocacy Group to talk about the Birdie. And in April, we have Claire Zugmeyer and Luke Cole from the Sonoran Institute to talk about the Santa Cruz. And following those, we'll probably have the Bill Williams River and the Agua Fria and maybe some others. So we hope you'll tune in to these river presentations and continue the discussions about what's going on with the rivers. So I covered some of the outreach and education that we've done. So I want to speak a little bit about some of the Watershed Health Bill that we tried to get passed. So all surface water in Arizona must be put to a beneficial use. And water for the environment was left out as a beneficial use. And it's been really hard to get it back in. So there are ways to get some water for recreation, wildlife, and fish using the in-stream flow process, the permit process, but it's very expensive, it's time consuming, it's burdensome for the applicant. And a review by Water in the West at Stanford University ranked Arizona last in giving out permit grants, granting permits for in-stream flow. So if the full allotment of surface water is not used for 5 years, it's subject to forfeiture. But there's a new law now that I'll speak more about in a moment that allows that conserved water to not be subject to this law. So over the past 4 years, our group has proposed a watershed health bill to allow conserved water to benefit rivers. It would have allowed watershed health uses of water as a beneficial use and allowed that conserved water to remain in the river, maintaining the rights priority date and not being subject to forfeiture. And also importantly, it would have required the Department of Water Resources to survey the health of the watersheds and the ecological water needs of our rivers. Really important data. And in our first few attempts, we couldn't get a hearing on the bill. But the last 2 attempts, we got hearings by getting this bill amended onto other bills in the committee. The Watershed Health Bill died in committee, but another bill involving conserved water was passed. And that bill states that a surface water right holder can file a conservation plan, and then that water right is not subject to abandonment. But it's not really clear what happens to that water. It's not really protected. It may be available for other uses. So ADWR will be posting these conserved water plans on their website. And if they're given the amount of water that's to be conserved, they'll post that too. So it'll be interesting to see how many people with surface water rights are actually conserving water. So after these multiple attempts, and with the legislature the same or possibly worse for 2022, we've decided not to pursue this watershed health bill again for next year. And we did talk about just running the survey part of the bill as a standalone bill, but it would be up against the same factors in trying to get a hearing. Senator Kirsten Engel pushed very hard for this bill, and she's resigned from the legislature because she's pursuing a run for the US Congress. So what I'm going to do now is turn these next few slides over to another steering committee member, Linda Person, and she can take a moment to explain her role in this committee and her interests, and then she's going to take over a little bit more about the survey part of the bill. So Linda.
Okay, thanks so much, Chris. Good information. As Chris was talking about our watershed health bill, a part of that bill, we had hoped to task the ADWR with providing more information on the health of our watersheds. Currently, we only have a good feel for about a third of our watersheds as far as what quantity and quality of water is available in the river, what flora and fauna are dependent on the river, sensitive habitat, geography, topography, challenges, things of that nature. So our hope was that every 2 years, the DWR would collect this data and provide it for the public. So we'd have a good baseline feel for the health of our watersheds in general. So what's important here too is that the quality of our water in streams and rivers is so dependent on the quantity. When we start lowering our flows and we see less water in the river, the quality typically degrades as well. And that can come from things like septic tanks or agricultural return waters, mining, tailings, things like that could all contribute. Bacteria, minerals, pesticides, herbicides, fertilizers, that sort of thing. And with lower flows in our rivers and streams, we see a general degradation of our water quality. So trying to define what the necessary amount of water is in our rivers to keep them viable and resilient and clean and usable is an important first step to better protecting them. So let's go to the next slide, Chris, please. So we're talking about the need of a certain amount of water for nature, but also us humans need water in our rivers as well. Things that we use the river for include boating, fishing, swimming, camping, hiking, and that contributes a great deal to our Arizona economy. The Audubon has recently studied this and determined that over $7 billion a year is spent in Arizona on water-related tourism. That's a nice sum and a good part of our state's GDP. So in addition to a monetary contribution, rivers give us a spiritual connection to nature. Water is nature's tranquilizer. I've heard it be said. It provides us a beautiful, restorative, and calming environment that is hard to put a price tag on. Let's go to the next slide, Chris. So Arizona is a unique place. We have several challenges. The most recent one is the climate challenge and aridification. And Chris has talked a little bit about some of our problems with the water law here in Arizona. We don't recognize that rivers need to be protected. We don't recognize the right of a river to exist. And we don't recognize generally that we need a certain amount of water, e-flows, environmental flows in our rivers for a resilient, sustainable river system and watershed to exist. So currently, water is available to be used to put toward a beneficial use, and every last drop of a river water could be put to a beneficial use, completely drying out the river. And we've seen this since European development began in our state. We've lost about 1,700 miles of flowing river and about 90% of our riparian habitat. You can look at Salt River that used to flow through Phoenix. It's now a dusty, cobbly, dry channel. And imagine what that once was, a beautiful riparian habitat with cottonwood trees and beavers, fish, etc. I don't know that we'll ever get that back, but the remaining habitat that we do have is very much a danger right now. And the last thing I'll mention too that we have a problem with, and this is a little on the technical side, is we're not legally recognizing the connection between surface water, river, creek water, and groundwater. So in many places in the state, we have uncontrolled and unregulated groundwater pumping close to our flowing, beautiful rivers. And when you take water out of the ground, it eventually impacts your river, leaving less water to flow into the river or actually taking water from the river because it's connected. So as Chris mentioned, Arizona is behind other Western states in finding a way to regulate its groundwater pumping and regulate and protect its rivers too. So we have challenges cut out for ourselves. And that's what our group is determined to work on. So I'll turn it back to you, Chris. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Linda. So our current water management systems and laws allow our rivers to run dry. And I think this question, how much better could we do if not constrained by current Western water laws, is an important one. So we all know protecting river flows is critical. And there are various ways to protect river flows. And the two I want to go into briefly are e-flows or environmental flows and water for nature or rights of nature. And when talking about e-flows, that refers to the quantity, the quality, and the timing of water to maintain an ecosystem. So other countries are facing similar scenarios with having critical rivers drying up. And they're doing a better job, some of them doing a better job of protecting the river flows. Australia and Africa have included water for rivers as part of their laws and management using e-flows. They haven't solved their water issues by any means, but we can certainly learn from them, what they did right, what they did wrong, and why. So the first one I want to talk about briefly are e-flows. And the use of environmental flows in water management has been proposed since the 1990s. And back in 2007, the Brisbane Declaration stated that environmental flows are essential for freshwater ecosystem health and human well-being, and that there's an urgent need to protect rivers. And this Brisbane Declaration was endorsed by over 800 scientists and economists and others, and over 50 nations. And another example of the importance of e-flows was the recognition given to Dr. Jackie King for her work in environmental flows and sustainable water management. Now, the rights of nature or the rights of rivers is another way communities are protecting or trying to protect their rivers. So I just want to go to this link to the Universal Declaration of the Rights of Rivers. There we go. And in it, it basically states that all rivers are living entities entitled to fundamental rights and entitled to legal guardians, and that these rights shall extend to the health of watersheds and river basins, and Indigenous communities will be represented in river guardianship, and all states will implement these rights and provide the resources necessary to ensure they're realized. So just some examples of what's happening in the United States in terms of using water for nature or rights for nature as a tool to try and better protect their rivers. Recently in Nederland, Colorado, they gave a watershed around that town fundamental and inalienable rights like those conferred on people and corporations. Now, what's happening in Orange County, Florida is a really interesting story. So that county passed an amendment that applied to 2 rivers and to other county waterways. And it grants the waterways the right to be free from pollution and the right to exist. And it allows citizens to file lawsuits on behalf of the waterways to enforce these rights. So as you can imagine, various industries were opposed to this. And a clean water bill was moving through the Florida state legislature at the time Orange County was passing this amendment. And the state legislature got language inserted preventing local governments from granting legal rights to nature. So basically preventing them from being able to sue for pollution to these waterways. And the Florida Farm Bureau was an instrumental player in getting that language inserted into that state bill to override that new county ordinance. So currently in Florida, they are collecting signatures to get a constitutional amendment onto the statewide ballot for November in 2022 for the rights of all waterways. So in Florida, they have 30 counties or cities in some stage of developing a rights of nature ordinance or charter. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out in Florida. But it shows that people are just getting fed up with the conditions of their rivers, and they need to vote people in that are more supportive for water for nature, or they're trying to use these types of tools to get around those people that are in the legislatures now and are not so supportive of water for nature. So here are just some other places in the United States and around the world that are trying to use these tools. In Santa Monica, California, Pennsylvania, Ohio, New Mexico, even some tribal entities are granting rights to rivers through their lands. And in Ecuador, rights of nature is actually in their country's constitution. And in New Zealand, the Wanganui River was granted legal personhood back in 2017. So it has the legal rights of a human. It has 2 legal guardians. And the Maori tribe had this in the New Zealand courts since 1873. And finally in 2017, went through all the court systems and it was granted this legal personhood. So that's a done deal in New Zealand. Now in the United States, most of these have not been tested in court yet. And some that have been thrown out. So again, it's just a tool that some communities are trying to use to better protect their rivers. And there's been greater success with this tool in other countries. So our current water laws allow our Arizona rivers to dry up. But granting rights of nature or rights of rivers changes how we think about rivers. It changes from a property-based ownership perspective to more of a personhood perspective, giving rivers and nature rights that can be enforced in courts. So these concepts are not necessarily new to Arizona. There was a symposium back in 2019, the Desert Waters International Symposium, where some of these concepts were discussed. Governor Lewis from the Gila River Indian community speaks about a moral responsibility to be stewards of nature. And in our people's public hearings, Vincent Randall from the Yavapai Apache Nation and Berlin Jose from the Tohono O'odham Nation shared similar perspectives about rivers as beings and the need to protect flows as a moral responsibility. So some of the other concepts discussed at this symposium was personhood for rivers, the public trust doctrine as a possible mechanism that other states are using to get more water in their natural systems. And if you go by Western water law, first in time, first in right, nature's the first user, so should have the first rights. And like I mentioned briefly, Australia, they changed their right systems into shares, and the government actually buys shares of water for the river. Again, not working out as well as they thought, but not necessarily due to changing the right system. They also talked about the need to acknowledge the rights of the environment and indigenous users and for the future, including the economic benefits of healthy ecosystems. And it's going to take brave leadership to make any of these changes, to get any kind of water for nature. So this is from Title 45 of Arizona Water Law. And it states that the waters of all sources flowing in streams, canyons, ravines, etc., belong to the public. And these are key words that aren't mentioned often enough, that they belong to the public. And many states have a public trust doctrine that recognizes the public right to water resources. And it requires the states to maintain these resources for the public's use. Now, other states such as California and Hawaii have used the public trust doctrine to get more water in their natural systems. The Arizona legislature has made it more difficult and more complicated to apply this public trust doctrine to Arizona water resources. And yet, according to some recent Peril Trust polls in 2017 and in 2020, 64% of Arizonans say protecting the environment should be a priority, even if it slows growth. And Arizonans ranked sustainable flows for rivers and wildlife as a high priority in determining water use. So water for rivers is important to the public, but there are few mechanisms for the public to help get it allowed. So the Sustainable Water Network has been asking the hard questions, such as who is at these decision-making tables and who is missing. There's usually one Enviro rep at the tables, but that one Enviro group doesn't necessarily reflect all of the environmental views of the community. And isn't it time to legally recognize the connection of groundwater and surface water, like Linda mentioned? Is it time for a more holistic water management? Is it time to look at other models? And also, what about transparency? We are now in a tier 1 shortage, and we've heard that tier 2 and 3 may be coming a lot sooner than people expected. So what does that really mean? And how can Arizona have sound, sustainable water management without data? We need e-flows, we need groundwater data. And isn't it time to openly discuss appropriate uses of water? In the Colorado River Basin, significant amount of water goes to irrigate alfalfa. And in the Phoenix area, 50% of water goes for outdoor use, for watering lawns. And then there are water markets. Who benefits from these water markets and at what cost to the environment and to the local communities? So these are hard questions requiring difficult choices. And we need to have more public conversations about these questions and these choices. So we have the same people at the decision-making tables, representing the same interests, making decisions constrained by outdated Arizona water laws. So these water laws were made over 100 years ago to promote unlimited growth and development that no longer apply to these times. So how much better could we do with different models that would allow rivers to exist in some minimal state of health so that they're around to provide for all? And how do we get the different values of rivers incorporated into these conversations and into these decision-making tables to move beyond allowing water to be used and pumped until our rivers are gone? We've seen it with the Santa Cruz. We see it in various areas of the San Pedro River, and we see it in other rivers. So the current way of managing water isn't the only way. And we need to find more ways to get water for nature into our Arizona laws. So, and time is a factor. I mean, we know climate change can't be solved in a timely manner by enacting bits and pieces of legislation over several years. The same is true for water. All eyes are on Lake Mead and Lake Powell and the Colorado River, but all of our rivers are important. And we need better models to address protecting all of our rivers, protecting the minimum flows needed for them to exist so that all of us can benefit from them. And again, we need to keep reminding ourselves that these surface waters belong to the public. And yet public voices need more say in what's happening to these rivers. And isn't it time to put all possibilities on the table, including ways to allow rivers to exist? So we need to find more ways, better ways to keep including water for nature in these conversations. So as I mentioned before, there are many organizations out there involved with protecting our rivers, and they're doing great work under Arizona water law constraints. So we invite you to watch and to participate in this upcoming river series to keep learning about our rivers and how we can help. So I thank you for your attention, and now we can open it up for Q&A.
Thanks so much, Chris. If folks have questions, you can pop them into the chat or feel free to unmute. Or raise your hand. Any of those will work. Didn't see any questions yet. I also wanted to let everyone know that I did put the Zoom information in the chat for the upcoming Lower San Pedro River presentation that will be on November 17th. So I put that right in the chat if you're interested. Is Watershed Management Group part of the Sustainable Water Network is the question.
Yes, they were. I think they were. I'd have to go back and check, but I think they were part of the original signage for the conservation vision.
That's what I
But
thought.
I think there are members in the coalition emails that I send out. There are some members.
And it looks like Joey Wright has a question. Go ahead and unmute yourself if you want to, Joey.
Okay, I just put it in the chat, but my question is, if rivers are granted personhood in the United States, would that apply to the entire river or only the part of the river that is in the state that would enact that legislature?
Good question. And as I read it from these cases, from these different towns and different cities and counties that are trying to enact these various ordinances, it's only within where the river flows within their jurisdiction. They can't make the same constraints when it's out of their boundaries.
Let's see.
Chris, there is interesting stuff at the Supreme Court level. Actually, I think there's two different cases where states are battling each other over pumping and groundwater and diversion. So that obviously would be at a higher level.
Yeah. I would also ask our steering committee members if they have anything else they would like to add about the work that we're doing or the work that we've done on the Watershed Health Bill, or the interest that we now have in trying to promote water for nature and trying to keep tabs and educate ourselves more on what's happening with these other places that are using these tools for water for nature or rights for rivers, to try and, we're, like I mentioned in the presentation, we're not proposing any legislation advocating for that, but we are closely following other places that are.
There's another question in the chat. What is the role of water utilities in this? And have you seen a difference between private and municipal utilities?
Guess I'm not quite understanding the question in terms of water utilities and getting water for rivers.
I think so. Kate, do you want to unmute and clarify your question?
I was just wondering, since they're obviously a big part of what's drawing the water, or the various water utility companies, have some been better or worse as far as fighting legislation to provide some portion of water to the rivers, or I'm guessing, but I don't know, that privately run water utilities, like in some of the suburbs of Phoenix, would be, I don't know what, less responsible than ones that are water utilities run by a town. I know, for instance, that they're working with supplying reclaimed water to the Santa Cruz. And that I assume would be part of the water utility action to support that. Does that explain it better?
Yeah, I think this is Sandy. I think there have been some municipalities and entities, like Pima County, for example, that have been more engaged in keeping rivers flowing. And, so I would say that there have been some public ones engaged in it. I'm not aware of any private entities that have been involved in it. So.
Okay, thanks.
And the next question.
Something that's related to that, which is the state of Arizona and Nevada are looking at paying $6 million each to the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California to help the Metropolitan Water District to achieve 100% recycling of water that's now going into the Pacific Ocean. And it's kind of interesting that we're willing to pay $6 million to California, but we're not willing to invest in recycling of water to the same degree in Arizona, and instead are proposing things like pipelines from the Missouri or Mississippi rivers or desalination plants in the Gulf of California. There was another interesting one too, but I forgot it now, but I'll stop there.
Yeah, but that's only so California will leave more water in Lake Mead. So
Exactly.
Roz is asking, what is the criteria for introducing monitoring in this session, determining the state of our waters? Roz, do you mean how will we decide whether to introduce monitoring legislation this session?
Correct, yes. I think that's what Linda mentioned, that the network was thinking that they might introduce that portion of the previous bill.
Yeah, I think key to that is whether there would be a shot of it advancing we just didn't think that it made sense to keep doing the same thing over and over again. But if there was a shot of having a real hearing and it moving forward and getting some support, maybe from, the agency and others, then it would make sense to do it. And it's
And-
not looking real good right now.
And in particular, measuring of groundwater pumping, which isn't done in most of the state. And the non-AMA groundwater committee meeting last week, there was some pretty serious comments from other folks at the table about Gail Griffin's refusal to allow the stuff to be heard and refusal to allow the water to be measured even. So maybe.
And AMA is active management area, and Gail Griffin is the representative who chairs the Natural Resources, Energy and Water Committee. And she's a huge roadblock to any positive water legislation, including ours. So
Measuring what's pumped.
Yeah, and I think other, it's frustrating here in Arizona, and that's why I think watching what's happening in Florida could be really interesting, because they did pass the ordinance for water for nature for those specific waterways, and when the legislature caught wind of what was going on and they inserted that language in there that took away the county's right to then sue for any of those waterways. And then now they're going to try and do a statewide ballot. I mean, that at least shows that there's a lot of interest out there. And the fact that 30 counties in that one state have something going on in terms of, a charter or an ordinance for water for nature. So I think it's something that we do need to keep an eye on and see how that's going, because if you can't outvote these people, if you can't vote them out, I should say, and get more people that think more sustainably about water in, then you got to try to use these other tools, to get around them. So it's an interesting concept that's going on out there. I don't think we're ready to propose anything like that from this group at this time, but it's an interesting movement. And it's happening out there. And there's even a movement in Colorado, the Colorado River Basin with Gary Wachner and Save the Colorado. They're all about trying to get rights for the Colorado River. So it's not new, and it's not just, happening here and there. And it's, like I said, it's been used successfully in other countries. So we'll see what happens here in the United States.
there's one more question in the chat. This may be the last one before we wrap. What do you think the likelihood of the beneficial use law, what do you think the likelihood is of changing the beneficial use law in the near future?
Well, speaking from experience, from what we went through, in the near future, I don't think it's likely at all. If you're talking about changing laws to allow water for nature, to get more, or to allow conserved water to be used as a beneficial use, it's not likely at all.
Yeah, I think in Arizona, as long as we have the same makeup of the legislature, that nothing's going to happen. It would take a change in the ideas espoused by the members of the legislature, probably through a party shift that might be more successful.
well, there's one other tool, and that would be ballot measure as well. And that would take a huge effort, but that is one of the nice things about Arizona, is that there is an alternative to the legislature. It's just very expensive.
Yeah, and I think for a while, at least, it's going to be a cat and mouse game like we saw in Florida, where you pass something and then the legislature says you can't. You get an initiative through, and then just as with other initiatives, the legislature tries to modify it and nullify it. Same thing happened to the folks who wanted to protect Lake Erie in Toledo, Ohio. As soon as their citizen initiative got passed, the state legislature stepped in and said, no, you can't do that. And it also failed in federal court. So unfortunately, it was just too broad. They were trying to save all of Lake Erie from the city of Toledo, and they could not bind other entities, the court found. So there went the ordinance.
All right, well, I don't see any other questions. So thanks again, Chris and Linda, and the other folks from the Sustainable Water Network that helped with questions this evening. And thank you all for joining. We did record the session, so we'll make that available if you missed part of it, because I think a few folks came in a couple minutes late. And hope you will continue to join us with the river series. And then also, I know Sierra Club will be doing a few additional programs on water, including the impacts of mining on water in our state. So look for information on that in the near future. So thanks again, and have a great evening, everyone.
All right, thank you.